All right, welcome to NetBox Heroes. This is a podcast that's inspired by the NetBox and the network automation communities, where we're featuring and we're learning from some of the awesome networking pros in our community. I'm Chris Beavers, I'm the CEO of NetBox Labs, and I am your host today. Our goal with this podcast, NetBox Heroes, it's to learn about the people in the NetBox community, the network automation community, how they've developed in their careers as networking pros, what the networks they work with are like, some of the problems they're tackling, how NetBox and other tech fits into the stack. I am thrilled today to have Omid Mortazavi on the podcast. Omid's been in networking for more than 20 years or so,
Yeah, at least.
across a lot of roles, so quite a while. Right now, Omid is a practice lead for network automation, cloud, and DevOps at Opticore, which is an IT consultancy in the UK that works with a whole bunch of major enterprises on their networking and their network automation architectures. Also, Omid and the Opticore team are active contributors in the NetBox community, most recently with a couple of new NetBox plugins that they open sourced earlier this year. So, Omid, thank you for joining me today. Really excited to have you here.
No, thanks for having us, Chris.
Wonderful. And why don't we just start with the obvious? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself to get us going?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, like you say, I've been kind of around networking for quite some time. I'll take you through how my journey's kind of come full circle and how sort of automation plays into that, which is pretty cool, I think. So, yeah, I guess I was a big techie like back in school. So in the 90s, kind of going through our GCSEs in the UK, tech was what I loved. My big brother's a massive techie as well, so he
Mm,
kind of blazed the path for me and yeah, showed me that was a direction I was pretty interested in. So I started on a summer job in kind of the 98 running cables, literally started on the bottom, lifting up floor tiles, doing all that kind of stuff, and working on a help desk. I was pretty big into coding from the get-go, so decided to try and do some development on the help desk product. So that was all VB written, so had a kind of
mm,
early start into a bit of VB. Um, from that, I decided to go and study computer science. That was kind of natural progression. Back in the day, there weren't the kind of network specific tracks
right.
really in uni. So that was really the only option I had. Went into that, but I always had this love for networking. Like I think there was just something quite satisfying, tangible about plugging in cables, logging onto the device, the kind of old school thing I quite enjoyed. Um, yeah, went through uni. Really enjoyed the networking side of things. Did an internship doing some network design, which I loved. Managed to do my CCNA during that time. For my dissertation, I ended up taking that help desk application, rewriting it in Java. So that was pretty cool. So it was a nice. It was kind of applicable. It was infrastructure. It was
Mm-mm.
development. It was coding. I quite enjoyed that. Ended up graduating, went straight into networking. I kind of knew that was my passion. So did quite a few years of just I guess building up my experience, my profile in networking. Joined a company and decided it was time to kind of go for a CCIE. So I think in 2020, 2012 I ended up passing that. So that was
Mm.
actually my first introduction to Jeremy Stretch, right? Was the packet life back in the day. So like his cheat sheets were plastered all over my wall, and quite a
Right.
few of my colleagues at the time. That was they were kind of invaluable to us on that journey. Um, so yeah, I kind of did that piece, threw myself at networking full time. Decided after that I wanted to specialize, so I kind of decided to specialize in
Mm-hmm.
multicast. Like it was a little bit niche, a little bit quirky. I quite enjoyed that. Went into kind of ultra low latency multicast market data. That was the area that I would sort of specialized in. Did that for quite a while. And then Grev, who's one of the founders of Opticore, sort of reached out to me and said, "Look, they've started up this new company. It was an opportunity to get in at the ground floor, join them, and it was a bit of a departure from my traditional role. Like I've always been
Mm.
an engineer. I've been hands-on at the coalface, kind of doing work. So it was an opportunity to actually step away and do something more central. So when I first joined, I was still doing a mix of the two. So um, trying to develop this practice. Kind of at the time I called it sort of emerging tech, but it's now
Mm-hmm.
kind of become one of the, I guess, one of the principal streams of our business now. So that's automation, sort of DevOps and cloud practice. And yeah, a few years into that, kind of moved back into HQ. So now I kind of work exclusively in HQ. So yeah, we offer kind of professional services, managed services. Um, so it's leading the strategy of the business, like what the directions we want to take this business, But actually, one of the big things which I love is around the kind of learning and development of all of our engineers. Like, we're big
Mm.
investors in our people. We believe that, like, we want to teach people the tech, teach them how to use it, and so it's a really good opportunity for us to kind of get people in and start to develop them. So I've kind of created this. Everything we do begins with Opti, right? So we created Optiversity. So these are some kind of really distinct learning paths, like,
Mm.
we talk about network engineer 2.0, like what does a modern network engineer look like, so that's building in, I guess, a lot of the net DevOps initiative that, like, Cisco are going for. It was kind of an earlier version of that, like, how do we make this more rounded engineer, so you're not just looking at packets and frames.
Well, it was really fascinating. And so right away, you've had kind of, I would call it like a many and varied career, right? You started at the help desk,
Mhm.
to your point, really hands-on keyboard as a network engineer through many years, and now in a leadership role with exposure to a lot of different networks and stacks and so on. But the thing that
Mm.
really caught my attention there, and I'd love to dig into a little more, is the learning and development focus
Mm.
at Opticore, because one of the things I find really fascinating to ask people who are a couple of decades into their career is like,
Mm.
what are some of the things that you would impart to people earlier in their career as important lessons that you've learned, and you're actively working on that at
Mm.
Opticore and creating these learning pathways for your team. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what are some of those like fundamentals that you think are really important for engineers who are earlier
Mm.
in their career to focus on, to learn about some of the basic principles of getting started in networking?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think kind of, you know, the first thing is, like, nothing beats hard work. Like, if you choose your path, apply yourself to that path, and make sure that you kind of invest in yourself.
Mm.
Um, but with that, there's a lot of things that can help you, like surround yourself with good people. Like, always make sure that you're around people who are better than you. Like, that's kind of, it's pretty easy for me,
Hmm.
but that's what I try and do is surround myself with engineers who are, who can help me progress and challenge. That's something we try and foster, is like a nurturing environment where people can, we can help each other, we can build community. So if you're fortunate enough to, either within your organization, or there's meetups now, so like the wider environment, get involved, speak to people who are passionate about it.
Mm.
Find what you're particularly passionate about, because as soon as you find that, then the work becomes much easier,
Easier.
right?
Hmm.
So I think that's obviously a big part of it. Um, and also, kind of, be brave, like, ask questions, put yourself out there, don't be afraid to get it wrong, within reason, like, don't go and cause any P1s, right? But yeah, go out, ask questions if you're not sure. It's, be afraid to fail. Like, we've all been there. And I think there's a bit of a cultural shift. I think now it's getting better than it was before. It was
Hmm.
a little bit harder to do that. The resources were a little bit harder to come across, but now I think, yeah, the community is really kind of, yeah, I'd say, grown. Even in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, there's been a big
Hmm.
movement towards community based. Get involved in the Slack channels. Yeah, start talking to people, ask the questions, find out how to do things from people who've done it.
I think you're spot on, right? The community, the networking community generally, and something I really enjoy about it is it's a community that wants to help people learn and develop in their careers and as professionals in this ecosystem. And so there's just a lot of willingness to help, and what you can't be is afraid to ask for the help
Yeah,
and afraid to dive in.
yeah.
Something else that you touched on that's a little different than a lot of the other guests that we've had on the podcast is you've had both really hands-on keyboard roles directly working on networks in the enterprise, but today that's not quite the role, right? Your purview is all of your customers' networks and tech stacks, and let's start there on the career side. I'm just curious, like what's different about um, being a little bit independent
Mm.
of the networks that you're working on and helping evolve. What's different about that than being in a direct network engineering role?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I guess a lot of it is it's being able to kind of abstract away a little bit, and talking to the kind of, I guess, the relevant stakeholders. Like, now it's a lot more talking to people, our customers, about what kind of business value can we deliver to them, what's the sort of technical value. So it's having those high level conversations. I'm no longer talking about kind of trying to elicit low level requirements, putting together HLDs, LLDs, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So it's having a high level conversation. It's also kind of a broader spectrum as well now. I think the discussions now are more around systems generally rather than specifics around networking in particular. It's been a real kind of challenge as well in a way for me. That's a learning cycle. I want to get down and I want to plug cables in and I want to configure routers. That's kind of what I
Hmm.
love. So not doing that every day is a real challenge. I haven't lost it all, which is quite nice. There's some muscle memory in there. But so yeah, I'm trying to kind of, I guess, grow and develop in those areas as well. So that's a sort of a personal challenge for myself to do, which I'm really enjoying. So yeah, it's understanding that. It's understanding market trends, like where are our customers going, what are they looking at, where are they moving, where are they moving forward, and understanding as well, having that appreciation that it's all sort of contextual. Like not every customer is equal. So
Hmm.
most of our customers are kind of large FTSE 250 companies, but we've got a load of SMB customers as well. So the challenges and the conversations that you have with those, and the level of engagement and siloing is totally different between the customers. So it's becomes a lot more understanding I guess the organization, the
Hmm.
cultural challenges of that company, which is different. For a techie, sometimes we like to just concentrate on the tech. So to understand those elements it's quite refreshing.
Oh, it's really fascinating because I imagine, and I think what I'm hearing from you is no two customers are alike, no two networks are alike, no two
Hmm.
technology problems are alike, right? And a lot of this job is about understanding the nature of the environment that you're interacting with, and the not just the technology problems or the networking problems, but also the cultural challenges or considerations, I guess you would say,
Mm.
in identifying solutions to the problems that are in front of these customers. And I'm lucky to have, in a different way, sort of a similar purview in that we, of course, work with many customers, very different networks, and what you say totally resonates. Every network is different, every team is different, every
Hmm.
kind of problem space is different. That said, there are
Yeah.
some interesting similarities, and one of the things, maybe to start to pivot toward the tech side a little bit, I'm
Mm.
curious to pick your brain on is, um, again, unlike many folks in our community who tend to be hands-on with the same network all day, every day, and really working in kind of their own problem space, you have this breadth of exposure. What, First of all, maybe like, what are some of the kinds of networks, some of the kinds of technologies, ecosystems that you find yourself working in? I'm really curious, what are some of the common patterns or problems or challenges? And then also, what are some of the things that, maybe surprisingly are different across all these networks that you have to think
Yeah,
about?
sure. Yeah, I guess we've seen in the last few years, we've seen this kind of massive shift. And I never thought we'd see it. One of the reasons I went into networking is it was never going away. It was this foundation of your infrastructure, and it was never going to change. You learn your protocols, and that's all well and good. And then, yeah, in the last sort of 10 years, we've seen this real step change away from traditional networking, I guess, into
Mm,
kind of software-defined networking. So we've seen a big a big movement towards software-defined networks, so networks that are being orchestrated by the various vendors.
mm,
Um, Software-defined networking itself on the WAN as well, and WAN edge, how people manage their enterprises has totally changed. So, traditional kind of free-tier architectures have gone, and having managed networks is now a preference for a lot of customers. Um, Automation has just started to really take off. Like, I mean, you know, it's been around since 2015 odd, really,
mm,
in anger, but it's only in the last it really surprises me in the last 2 or 3 years that it's really getting some investment and focus, and I think people are starting to see the real merits in that. And it's an interesting one because everyone's on a different journey in this kind of
mm,
automation space. So a lot of that is uh, comprehension is really relative. So each customer is very different in where they are on their automation journey. So depending on where they are, we can start to help them and help them understand from, how do I start automation? How do I develop my teams to, right, I've started it now. How do I consolidate it?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of NetBox is one of the solutions that we kind of go into that.
Mm.
The other big thing is cloud, like the movement towards cloud, and the movement away from cloud. It's something that we started to see in the last kind of couple of years. So and we're really, like, as network engineers, it's a funny one actually. I think we're in a prime position to understand that. We understand infrastructure really well. We understand cloud connectivity, the development of networks within the cloud really well. Yet sometimes we can be seen as dinosaurs because we are
Mm-hmm.
traditional infrastructure guys. So which I think is a massive discredit to the kind of the skills and expertise that people have kind of built up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of trying to break down those barriers, build these kind of like in a few of our customers, we've tried to actually take away the siloing of cloud teams and network infrastructure
Mm.
teams, bring everyone to the same table. So we kind of create these centers of excellence. So we try and foster this kind of holistic view on your infrastructure and your network, so and in your patterns, rather than people having their own little sort of empires and pockets
Mm-hmm.
and perceptions on what people can do. So
Mm.
so yeah, it's a much, I guess it's as much a cultural shift as it is a tech shift.
Totally agree with that. No, I want to come back to something you said earlier because I want to pick your brain on the why behind it. I 100% agree, and this is our same, lens at NetBox Labs that in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, we've seen this big acceleration in the impetus to automate the network, right?
Mm.
Uh, I'm curious for the why. Like, why do you think that is? What's changed in the last, 5 years or so that's really driving, your
Mm.
customers, at least that you have exposure to be thinking about automation?
Yeah, definitely. I guess part of it's just that kind of organic growth of the community and the tooling that's out there. So that, I guess, that does a couple of things. It sort of self-evangelizes everything. So I guess the developers of the various network-specific automation libraries and NetBox as a product, etc., that's helped people grow and understand the art of the possible. Like, what
Hmm.
does network automation help me achieve? Um, the move of all the vendors away from traditional networking to software-defined networking has certainly helped the argument. The move towards APIs and structuring of data is another big driving. We're no longer now going and running primitive operations, passing output, etc. So even the vendors have invested in it. The
Mm.
vendors and their development programs obviously has an effect from the kind of the ground up. I think the businesses are now starting to see value as well. There's more kind of uh, there's more examples of how network automation has helped reduce just the regular BAU and toil. So
Hmm.
they're now starting to see that investment is worthwhile. And I guess over the few years, where engineers have worked their way up and they've moved into these kind of management positions, they've probably had that opportunity to feed down
Mm.
those advantages from the top down as well as from the bottom up, which is where we're traditionally trying get network automation through the door. So yeah, I
Mm.
think it's kind of multifaceted, and I guess it's just grown.
Yeah, a few things that I've heard you say there that are, really stand out to me. I mean, one, the barriers to automation have come down, right? Like the
Mhm.
technology has progressed, sufficiently that it's possible to, proceed down an automation journey. The other one that you said there at the end that is really fascinating to me is, we've got a bit of a sea change in the culture and the actual people doing the work on a
Mm.
day-to-day basis, and we've got now folks. Developing into management and leadership positions who value automation and have, invested themselves in, their expertise here. And I think when you combine those things, the other thing that I think, at least in my life, I've seen is a lot of complexity has crept into these, technology stacks and network environments, and that demands automation, right? So you have the conditions that require automation to, continue to evolve the network and the enterprise. In line with, as you say, business value and the culture shift and the technology shifts, it all sort of conflates, and we see this acceleration
Yeah,
happening. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think
interesting.
that kind of convergence into cloud has probably helped as well. Like, I think the
Hmm.
people working in there, a lot of the people who've moved into DevOps are dev based, so they're used to doing things programmatically and automating things. So there's probably a bit
Hmm.
of bleed into wider infrastructure as well. Like, when you start to see other people doing it, you start to question, why can't I do it?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that kind of cross pollination, I guess.
Totally makes sense. Now, a different thing that you touched on, I'd like to explore a little bit is call it the automation journey, right? And
Mm,
I think you very rightly highlighted every customer of yours, every company is somewhere on an automation journey. Some of them are at the earliest phase. Like we think we maybe need to begin this journey, right?
hmm
And others have invested a lot in network automation and are now driving consolidation. Talk just a little bit, if you could generalize for a moment, like what do you think that journey looks like for most enterprises who are, progressing through it? Are there
Yeah.
common patterns?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess the first is like growing and fostering that interest in automation. So it's having teams, individuals who are actively interested in how do I automate the network? What's the why, the what, and the how of doing that? So that kind of that starts to plant the seeds. Um, it's understanding at those early levels, like what are the competencies within the teams, how can we grow those
Hmm.
competencies. So that's one of the areas we look at trying to upskill our customers in the real basics, like let's just get people interested in this, start to question what in my
Hmm.
day to day can I do to automate. And I guess that's where most people start. Like I think one of the first scripts I wrote was a validation script, because I was spending 4 hours trying to validate a change and
Right.
invariably getting it wrong. So it's how can I make my life easier as an individual, as an engineer. Then it's how can I start to expand that? And I guess that's where we start to see the growth of automation. Like, how do I take these
Hmm.
siloed automation projects, and how do I start to consolidate those into maybe an automation framework, something that's reusable? How can I start to now build this culture and a team within the organization? How can people start to contribute and become part of an automation product rather than just siloed scripts?
Hmm.
Um, it's one of the places we actually position NetBox like really nicely. Like we kind of advocate using NetBox and NetBox plugins as it can it could be an automation platform, because it's actually a
Hmm.
product. It's something people can see. It's got UI. It's tangible. They see results. So people quite like that. They now know that they're no longer working on a single script that does something. They're
Hmm.
starting to build functionality of a product, which is really nice. The other side of that is helping them on the journey to get there, because it's not
Hmm.
particularly easy to go and develop a plugin per se, especially if you're a novice developer. So
Right.
and that's one of the things we're trying to do, like with an optical. We've got a learning pathway geared specifically at writing NetBox plugins. So,
Hmm.
like, how do we enable engineers to start going and developing plugins? So we start with basic Python, we build them to OOP, we teach them Django, then we start to teach them NetBox specific
Hmm.
constructs. So, like, how do we take people on that journey? Um, and then I guess on the far spectrum of that, it's yeah, how do I now integrate my automation? Like, how do I take uh, these practices that I'm doing and integrate it with wider systems for change control, verification, monitoring, that kind of thing, and start to understand, right now, I guess beyond that, what's the sort of business value that we're starting to get out of automation? What are the KPIs? How can I tangibly uh, go to someone at C-level and say, right, network automation is giving you X, Y, and Z benefit, and be able to quantify that? That's the kind of, I guess that's the other end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, listen, I'm on the vendor side, typically. And so, of course, I'm always thinking about the business value piece as well. Uh, and I'm just curious to just extend that discussion a little bit further, right? Like, how do you find, among your customers and those engineers, that narrative developing around like we need to invest in automation, right?
Mm.
It's going to save us time and dollars, it's going to reduce risk. What are some of the big drivers of network automation?
Yeah, I mean, I guess those are the two big things. I think when people, if they start to view sort of a lot of run rate network tasks as kind of technical
Mm.
debt, like unnecessary time that their resources are spending doing this, that they can start to quantify, like implementing certain bits of automation we can consolidate time, we can reduce cost by
Mm.
X and Y, and this actually facilitates engineers working on the things that we need engineers to work on. So
Hmm.
there's some I guess pretty basic examples of that. Then I guess you could start to quantify sort of change, rate of change, errors
Hmm.
within change. So I imagine if you went into it, you could probably pull out some quite nice metrics. I haven't actually seen any studies on that, but I imagine there's probably going to be some quite interesting output, like how was it before we started, and how is it starting to progress and evolve over time. So
Yeah, just a brief anecdote of my own, right? I obviously used to operate NS1, which is a large managed DNS network, and y- we as we automated our network operations, observed a pretty dramatic reduction in
mm,
I mean, obviously manual errors, right? You drive repeatability and consistency in these processes. And like to me, that
mhm,
was one of the biggest drivers of business value in network automation. That's what led us to NetBox. And so,
yeah.
I'd love to pivot to that for just a second. You've touched on NetBox a few times. Uh, for you and your practice, for your customers, what is the role that NetBox usually plays in, especially in the automation strategy or the network operations strategy? How does it fit in?
Yeah, so we've got, I guess there's two avenues that we see NetBox in. So the first is we offer a managed service offering. That's one of the things that we do. So we have a NOC, we manage customers' networks. So the first thing that we do is deploy NetBox. Like, so we need to get an accurate understanding of the customer's estate. What are
Mm,
the assets? What's the inventory? So we're using a NetBox instance per customer to populate that to give us an understanding. That then seeds all of our other systems. So everything is pulled from NetBox. So we've got open source management platform, we've got an open source observability platform
mm,
where we surface data from NetBox and other systems. So everything comes from that source of truth, right? That's where we see NetBox within our own usage. The extension to that actually is with that we're building automation as a service. So in a similar uh, in a similar idea where you sign up to a managed service, you actually start to get this automation from us out of the box as well. So for general, for general purpose automation, so
mm,
config gen, compliance, backup, the usual kind of things.
mhm,
Um, Within the customers, I guess a similar story to how we use NetBox in its first instance as an inventory and source of truth platform. The other big thing that we're seeing a big uptake is again productization of automation. So it
mhm.
gives people a platform that they can start to build automation
Around.
on. Yeah,
Yeah,
around
I
exactly.
see. Mm,
Um, and that could either be directly on a plugin, or it could be with their own system that starts to feed data in, pull data from NetBox. So there's, I guess, depending on the organization and the tooling that they've got in place, that there's an opportunity to do that. So we've seen that in one of our customers. Actually, they're using NetBox as their inventory, as their source of truth, but they've
mhm,
actually got their own bespoke orchestration system that we're developing for them, and it goes and
mm,
it's more of a push model to NetBox rather than uh, populating it and pulling data from it.
mhm, mhm. One of the things that you've touched on a couple times, and I really want to explore, you've at Opticore built uh, plug-in practice almost, I would say.
Yeah, yeah.
My first exposure to Opticore actually sometime back was you had open sourced some exciting plugins in the community for NetBox,
Mm.
and you mentioned earlier as we were talking about learning and development that you've got a learning track on NetBox plugin development. Talk a little bit about how NetBox plugins fit into the strategy you're deploying for your customers, why
Mm.
you're invested there, why you've open sourced some of these plugins, some of the open source plugins you've put out there. Just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Sure. So like I say, I had this kind of idea of, as part of this managed service offering, is we can do automation as a service, like the common patterns across most networks, most customers. We can go and develop that and reuse it across our customers. And so I think there's great value. So a lot of stuff that we do, like we audit customers' networks, we kind of write golden standards for customers'
Mm,
networks. It's like, well, we could automate this. We could provide this value out of the box to our customers. It reduces our overhead. It increases the accuracy, and it's quite a nice little service to offer to the customers.
mhm,
So we started to look at the tooling. So we were like, do we go and build our own ecosystem of doing this? Do we want to use an off-the-shelf product to do it? we were like, actually, we've got the capabilities to do this in house, and more than that, it's an opportunity to give back to that community,
Mm,
and get the kind of input from the community on some good use cases, etc. So
mm-hmm,
yeah, we decided early on that we wanted to be sort of contributors to network automation rather than consumers of network automation, if that makes sense.
mm-hmm,
So we started to develop these plugins in house. So the three that we've got out there are kind of Nornir, Celery, and ERD plugin, um, and they are all kind of built. The first two, at least, are built out of our own requirements, and so we developed them. We started to use them on our managed service platform, and then we decided let's share this with the community. Let's get it out there. That's only going to help improve it for us. There might be other people who are facing the same challenges and can then
mm-hmm,
go and reuse it. Um, and I mean, we've got a huge list of plugins that we want to go out there and develop. It's getting the time. Like we've got three fantastic developers who work in our team who are kind of going out there writing this. So yeah, as much as they can handle, I'll be chucking some work their way to do. Um, the third plugin, which I think is pretty interesting, is the ERD plugin, and that was around kind of ease of adoption and
mm-hmm.
understanding of netbox and models. So it's less of a functional plugin, but it's more of a tool to help people sort of understand.
Keep going. I see. Can you talk just for a few seconds about exactly what the Celery and the Nornir plugins do? Because I think there is going to be a lot of interest in the community around these things. And
Yeah,
I was
sure.
checking them out earlier, but I think it'd be really great to just touch for a moment on what they are.
Yeah, of course. So NetBox Celery we're using as a distributed job queue, effectively. So it's where we have more complex job patterns. So if we need to handle parallelization in various job queues, if we needed to have asynchronous tasks that go and trigger various other tasks or jobs, it gives us the ability to do that. So I guess we see these first two plugins as real foundational plugins, like that on by themselves. They don't offer a great deal of functionality, but they
Hmm.
help to build the blocks of the plugins moving forward. The Nornir plugin was effectively a plugin that will allow us to use the NetBox ORM as an inventory into Nornir.
Mm,
So as soon as we do that, then we start to get the testing framework or the tasking framework that comes with Nornir. We can start to leverage the parallelization of Nornir as well, and then we can start to build on that with sort of future plugins. But yeah, it was
mm.
mainly around how we start to consume inventory, how we schedule tasks, nest tasks, etc. So they're all around, yeah, making some building blocks for plugins moving forward.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think, for anyone who's listening, obviously just go Google Opticore or NetBox plugins. I think you'll find these. But, to your point, really foundational capabilities for, building broader network automation on top of, I think, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe one or two more quick questions for you, Omid. On the open source side.
Mm.
So you're now contributing back. Opticore is contributing back to the community with these plugins and participating. You talked a little about why you decided to do that. One of the things I think our community really appreciates is, hearing a little bit about what is it about the community that really matters, right? Like why does the open source nature of NetBox really matter? And so I'd love to hear a few thoughts from you on that.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I mean, I guess at its heart, like we're all network engineers. Like we're all humans who love network engineering. So the ability to be able to kind of share that enjoyment with other people is for me the heart of that. So when we hire people here, like we look at someone's passion and their sort of their love of tech and networking. Like actually learning the tech is almost the next step. Like you can teach people
Hmm.
tech, but it's harder to teach that passion. So I think open source is the kind of the like it's one of the purest examples of that is people who are out there talking to each other, trying to share knowledge. Like I think that's a big
Yeah.
thing. Like I've never really been a believer in kind of siloed knowledge. I think it's about being able to go out there and share ideas with people. And then there's a return that you get from that is having those conversations. Like it sparks your own passion. Every time you leave a conversation with someone, you kind of it reinvigorates you, right, to go and pursue that. Um, it's being able to get all of that input. I mean, like it's a massive input that we can get into like what NetBox plugins are people interested in? What would really help fix your problem, make
Hmm.
your day to day easier? Like, and if we start to get an understanding of that, because it will be pretty common across most of us, like other than the sort of edge cases,
Hmm.
um, and then we can start to build that. And like the first iterations of that is us creating these plugins, and we'll continue to do that. We're trying our best to kind of foster that within our own organization, like building that contribution and that community that we've got. So I'd love to see 150 of our engineers join us and build these plugins. It's kind of there's four and growing at the moment. But then beyond that, it's there's no reason why the community can't start contributing and building and working together. So starting to collaborate outside of just our organization is just that extension. So um,
I totally agree with you. Just a brief thought here too. When you conflate all these factors that we've talked about, so the emergence and the urgency around network automation right now, the emergence and the existence and the growth of open source, and kind of the community around network automation, I think we're at a really exciting time. At the moment, and it's really fun to see that contribution start to sort of come due and be out in the wild, and for others to be contributing to it. And I think just a really exciting time for everybody in networking, and certainly network automation, because of all these conflated factors.
yeah.
I think with that, we've covered a lot of good ground today, Omid. So I think maybe I'll start to wind us down, unless there's anything else you want to make sure to touch on before we break.
No, I think that was a really good conversation there. Cheers, Chris.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. With that, we have reached the end of our show, and really covered a lot of inspiring ground, and just a bit of a different lens, I think, because of the nature of Opticore and the exposure you have to a lot of different networks and different challenges, compared to folks who are in a single network all day every day. So thank you again for joining us, and thanks everyone who's listening, everybody in the community, obviously, for contributing in so many ways. And we'll see y'all next time.